You know that moment when your world tilts off its axis? When everything you thought was solid ground suddenly feels like quicksand beneath your feet? Mine happened on a Tuesday, not a dramatic Friday night or a meaningful anniversary. Just a goddamn Tuesday at 3:47 in the afternoon when I found a receipt in Sarah's purse for a hotel I'd never been to. The Fairmont, downtown, room service for two, champagne. The kind of champagne Sarah always said was too expensive for just us. The kind she apparently wasn't too good for when she was with him. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Because this story, my story, it doesn't start with a hotel receipt. It starts with love, real love. The kind that makes you stupid and grateful at the same time. The kind that convinces you that you're the luckiest bastard who ever lived. I met Sarah 8 years ago at a coffee shop in Georgetown. She was reading Murakami, Norwegian Wood, and I made some pretentious comment about magical realism. She looked up at me with these green eyes that seemed to hold secrets, smiled, and said, "It's not magical realism, but I'll let you buy me a coffee anyway." That smile, Christ, that smile could stop traffic and wars, make grown men weep. It certainly made me fall, and fall hard. We were married 3 years later in her parents' backyard. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. She wore her grandmother's dress, this vintage thing from the 1940s that made her look like she'd stepped out of a film noir. I remember thinking, as she walked toward me through the garden, that I was the protagonist in the greatest love story ever told. I was Nick Carraway finally getting Daisy. I was the guy who beat the odds. The first 5 years were everything you'd want in a marriage. We had this rhythm, you know, Sunday mornings in bed with coffee and the Times, her legs tangled with mine while we fought over the crossword puzzle. She always got the literary clues. I was better with sports and pop culture. We'd argue about answers, and she'd trace letters on my chest with her finger when she was thinking. Those tiny intimacies that make a life worth living. We traveled. God, we traveled. Paris for our first anniversary, where she insisted on speaking French to every waiter, even though her accent was terrible. Rome for our second, where she cried in the Sistine Chapel and I held her hand in the dim light, both of us overwhelmed by something larger than ourselves. Thailand for our third, where she got food poisoning and I spent 2 days taking care of her in a shitty hotel room, and somehow it was one of the most romantic experiences of my life because she kept saying thank you, and I kept thinking, this is what love actually is, holding someone's hair back while they're sick and feeling grateful for the privilege. She had this way of making ordinary moments feel significant. The way she'd hum while cooking dinner, completely unconscious of it, usually something by Norah Jones or Billie Holiday. The way she'd leave little notes in my briefcase, thinking of you or proud of you, or sometimes just a terrible joke that would make me laugh in the middle of a boring meeting. The way she'd curl up against me on the couch, her head on my shoulder, and I'd smell her shampoo, this vanilla and honey scent that became home to me. We talked about having kids, not in any urgent way, but in that dreamy, someday kind of way that couples do when they're building a future together. She'd point out cute babies in restaurants, and I'd imagine teaching our son to throw a baseball or walking our daughter down the aisle someday. We had names picked out. Emma for a girl, after her grandmother, Jack for a boy, after mine. We had a whole life mapped out in our heads, this beautiful, impossible life that felt so real I could taste it. But somewhere around year 6, things started to shift. Not dramatically at first, just little things. She started working later, taking on more projects at the marketing firm where she was a creative director. She'd always been ambitious, and I was proud of her drive, so I didn't think much of it. She deserved success. She was brilliant at what she did, could take some boring corporate message and turn it into something that actually made people feel something. The late nights became more frequent. The business trips increased. She'd come home exhausted, distracted, her mind somewhere else even when her body was in our living room. When I'd ask about her day, her responses became generic. Fine, busy, you know how it is. The details that used to spill out of her, the office politics, the difficult clients, the creative breakthroughs, all of that stopped. The sex changed too. Not the frequency necessarily, though that dropped off, But the quality, the connection, she started closing her eyes more often, seemed to be somewhere else even when she was right there beneath me. I told myself it was stress, the natural ebb and flow of a long relationship. Everyone goes through phases, right? Everyone has dry spells. But it was more than that. She started guarding her phone like it contained state secrets. She'd place it face down during dinner, something she'd never done before. She'd take it with her to the bathroom, to the kitchen, to bed. If it buzzed while we were watching TV, she'd grab it with a speed that seemed almost panicked. When I'd glance over, she'd angle the screen away from me, her fingers flying over the keyboard with an urgency that made my stomach clench. Work stuff, she'd say if I asked. Always work stuff. The business trips increased. Chicago, Atlanta, San Francisco, sometimes for just one night, which seemed excessive for client meetings. She'd pack light, just a small overnight bag, and she'd seem almost eager to leave. The woman who used to hate being away from me, who'd call me 3 times a day from previous business trips, suddenly seemed relieved to have space. I started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. The way she'd shower immediately when she came home from these trips, even if she'd just showered at the hotel. The way she'd do laundry immediately, throwing her clothes straight into the machine instead of leaving them in the hamper like she usually did. The way she'd seem different for a day or two after returning, lighter somehow, but also guilty, like someone carrying a secret that was both burden and treasure. But the real moment, the one that made my paranoia crystallize into certainty, happened 3 months before I found that hotel receipt. We were at dinner with friends, Mike and Jennifer, a couple we'd known since college. Jennifer was talking about some article she'd read about infidelity statistics, how common emotional affairs had become in the age of social media. It was casual conversation, the kind of thing couples discuss abstractly, secure in their own relationships. I think emotional affairs are worse than physical ones, Jennifer said, twirling pasta around her fork. The emotional connection, the secrecy, that's the real betrayal. Mike disagreed. Physical is worse. That's crossing a line you can't uncross. They looked at us, expecting us to weigh in like we always did on these random debates. I was about to say something about how both were betrayals, just different kinds, when I noticed Sarah. She'd gone completely still, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Her face was pale, and she was staring at her plate like it held the answers to the universe. "Sarah," Jennifer asked, "what do you think?" Sarah blinked, seemed to come back to herself. I think they're both terrible. Any betrayal of trust is..." She trailed off, took a large gulp of wine. "Sorry, just thinking about a work situation." My mind wandered, but I was watching her face, and I knew that expression. I'd been married to her for 5 years. That wasn't work stress. That was guilt. That was the face of someone who'd been caught thinking about her own secrets. The rest of the dinner was torture. I kept watching her, looking for more signs, more tells. The way she laughed too loud at Mike's jokes. The way she kept checking her phone even though she'd left it in her purse. The way she avoided eye contact with me for the rest of the evening. That night, lying in bed, I asked her about it. "You seemed upset at dinner, during that conversation about affairs." She was lying on her side, facing away from me. "Just tired. It's been a long week." "Are you happy, Sarah? In our marriage, I mean?" The question surprised even me. I hadn't planned to ask it, but suddenly it seemed like the most important thing in the world. She was quiet for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, "Of course I'm happy. Why would you ask that?" But she still didn't turn around, and her voice had that careful quality it got when she was choosing her words too precisely. "I just feel like we've been distant lately, like you're somewhere else even when you're here. I'm just stressed about work. The Peterson campaign is killing me. You know how I get when I'm under pressure." I did know, but this felt different. This felt like someone going through the motions of being a wife, while her heart was somewhere else entirely. The next few weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. I started noticing everything. The way she'd smile at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. The way she'd started dressing differently for work. More carefully, more seductively. New lingerie that I never saw her wear for me. Perfume that wasn't the same one she'd worn for years. I found myself checking our credit card statements obsessively, looking for charges I didn't recognize, restaurants I'd never been to, stores I'd never heard of. There were small things, coffee shops in parts of town she had no reason to be in, lunches that cost more than a business meal should, gas stations nowhere near her office or our house. But it was all circumstantial, all explainable, until the hotel receipt. I wasn't snooping, not exactly. She'd asked me to grab her lipstick from her purse while she was getting ready for another business trip. And there it was, crumpled at the bottom next to her wallet. The Fairmont Hotel, room service, champagne, 2 entrees, a date from the previous week when she'd said she was working late on the Peterson presentation. My hands started shaking as I read it. The total was $347 for room service, the kind of money we'd spend on a special anniversary dinner, not a random Tuesday night meal. And the champagne? Dom Perignon, the same champagne we'd had on our wedding night, the one she'd said was too expensive for regular occasions. I stood there in our bedroom, holding this piece of paper that was destroying my life, and I felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart. That's too clean, too poetic. This was messier, more violent. Like someone had reached inside me and ripped out everything I'd believed about my life, about love, about the woman singing softly in our shower 20 feet away. I could hear the water running, could hear her humming that Norah Jones song she always hummed, "Come Away With Me." The irony was so sharp, it cut. I put the receipt back where I found it, got her lipstick, walked back to the bathroom like I was sleepwalking. She was standing at the mirror, applying mascara, wrapped in the towel I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. That was the cruelest part. She looked exactly the same as the woman I'd fallen in love with, but she was a stranger. "Thanks, babe," she said, taking the lipstick. She kissed my cheek, and I smelled that perfume again. Not the vanilla and honey of our early years. Something darker, more sophisticated, something for someone else. "How long will you be gone this time?" I asked. "Just 2 days, back Thursday night." She was packing her small bag, the one she'd started using for these trips. Everything efficient, practiced, like she'd done this 100 times. "Which hotel are you staying at?" She paused, just for a second. "The Marriott downtown, same as always." Lie. The receipt said Fairmont, and she knew it. She was lying to my face with the same mouth that had promised to love and honor me, the same mouth that had whispered my name in the dark, that had said yes when I proposed, that had sworn fidelity in front of everyone we loved. I watched her finish packing, watched her check her phone one more time before putting it in her purse, watched her kiss me goodbye at the door, her lips soft and familiar and now completely foreign. "I love you," she said, like she'd said 1,000 times before. "I love you too," I replied, because what else do you say when your world is ending? After she left, I sat in our living room for I don't know how long, just sat there, looking at the space where she'd been, at the life we'd built together, the photos on the mantle, our wedding, our trips, holidays with family, the couch where we'd spent countless evenings watching movies and talking about our days, the bookshelf filled with novels we'd shared, margins filled with notes we'd written to each other. Everything looked the same, but it was all different now, contaminated, like someone had taken our beautiful life and revealed it to be a stage set, pretty from the front, but hollow and fake behind the facades. I knew I had to be sure, had to have proof beyond a hotel receipt. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator, found one online, read reviews like I was buying a fucking appliance. Kevin Martinez, 20 years of experience, discretion guaranteed. Meeting him felt surreal. This middle-aged guy in a cheap suit, sitting across from me in a Starbucks, talking about surveillance like it was the weather. He was kind, professional, understood that this was killing me, said he'd seen it 1,000 times, always hoped he was wrong, but usually wasn't. "Most people know before they call me," he said. "They just need confirmation, need to know they're not crazy." I gave him Sarah's information, her schedule, her photo. Looking at her picture on my phone, the one from our vacation in Maine last summer, where she's laughing at something I'd said, her hair wild from the ocean wind, I felt like I was betraying her, even though she'd betrayed me first. Even though I was the victim here. Guilt, anger, and love all twisted together until I couldn't tell which emotion was which. Kevin worked fast. Within a week, he had photos, digital files sent to an encrypted email account, clinical and devastating. Sarah entering the Fairmont Hotel at 6:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah in the hotel bar with a man I didn't recognize. Sarah kissing that man in the elevator. Sarah leaving the hotel the next morning, looking satisfied and guilty and beautiful. The man was older than me, maybe mid-40s to my 35. Well-dressed, confident, the kind of guy who probably drove a BMW and knew about wine. In the photos, he had his hand on her lower back, that possessive gesture that said she was his. She was leaning into him, laughing at something he'd said, looking at him the way she used to look at me. But the worst photo was the last one. They were walking out of the hotel together, and she was checking her phone, probably checking to see if I'd called, if I needed her to maintain her lie. She looked happy, not guilty happy, not conflicted happy, just purely, simply happy in a way I hadn't seen her look in months. That's when I knew this wasn't just sex. This wasn't some moment of weakness or midlife crisis. This was love. She was in love with him. Maybe had been for a while. Maybe that's what I'd been seeing in her face for months. Not guilt over betraying me, but the glow of someone falling in love and trying to hide it. I stared at those photos for hours, memorized every detail. The way she tilted her head when she laughed with him. The way he touched her face like she was precious. The way they looked at each other like they shared secrets, like they were the only two people in the world who mattered. I'd been replaced, not just as her husband, but as her person. He was her person now, and I was just the man she lived with, the obligation she came home to, the lie she maintained. Kevin called the next day with more information. The man's name was David Chen, a client at her firm. Divorced, successful, owned a tech startup that had gone public 2 years ago. They'd been seeing each other for 4 months. Always at the Fairmont, always on days when she told me she was working late or traveling for business. 4 months, a third of a year. All those nights she'd come home to me, kissed me hello, asked about my day, made dinner, watched TV, made love to me. She'd been living a double life. She'd been performing the role of my wife while being someone else's lover. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that I almost admired its efficiency. She'd compartmentalized us perfectly, marriage Sarah and affair Sarah, never letting them contaminate each other. Except they had contaminated each other, hadn't they? Every time she touched me after being with him, every lie she told, every moment of tenderness she'd shared with me while her hearts belonged to someone else. I could have confronted her then, could have thrown the photos on the kitchen table and demanded explanations, apologies, promises to change. Could have screamed and cried and begged her to choose me. But I didn't, because I realized something in those long, dark hours staring at the evidence of my marriage's death. I didn't want her to choose me. I didn't want to be chosen over someone else. I didn't want to be the safe option, the fallback plan, the man she settled for because I was already there. I wanted to be someone's first choice, their only choice. And I wasn't Sarah's anymore. Maybe I never had been. Maybe David was just the first man brave enough to offer her what I couldn't. Newness, excitement, the thrill of being discovered all over again. But I also wasn't going to just roll over and accept it. Wasn't going to quietly file for divorce and split our assets and pretend this was just one of those things. She'd humiliated me, lied to me, stolen months of my life while living a fantasy with someone else. She'd made me complicit in my own deception, made me love a ghost. So I decided to give her a taste of her own medicine. Not an affair. I couldn't stomach the thought of touching another woman while still married to Sarah, regardless of what she was doing. But I could play her game. I could let her think she was getting away with it while I prepared my own surprise. I started documenting everything, every lie, every late night, every business trip. I kept a journal, timestamps and details, building a case. I consulted with a divorce attorney, not to file yet, but to understand what I was entitled to, how to protect myself financially. Turns out, adultery still matters in some states, including ours. Turns out, someone who breaks their marriage vows can lose quite a bit in the division of assets. I also started making some changes in my own life. Started working out again, something I'd let slide during the comfortable years of marriage. Started reading more, picking up hobbies I'd abandoned. Started investing time in friendships I'd neglected while building a life with someone who was building a life with someone else. The strange part was, I started feeling better. Not happy. I was still devastated, still angry, still humiliated. But stronger. Like I was becoming myself again, instead of just half of a couple. Like I was remembering who I'd been before I defined myself entirely by my relationship with Sarah. She noticed the changes, of course. Asked why I was suddenly so interested in the gym, why I was reading philosophy again, why I seemed so calm about her increasingly frequent absences. Just trying to better myself, I'd say, trying to be the best version of me.
She'd smile and nod, probably relieved that I wasn't being clingy or suspicious, probably thinking it made her double life easier if I was distracted by my own pursuits. She had no idea I was preparing for war. The end came on a Friday night in October. She was supposed to be in Chicago for the weekend, another business trip that I knew was another lie. I'd asked Kevin to verify, and sure enough, she was at the Fairmont again. Their usual room, their usual pattern. But this time, I was ready. I'd spent weeks preparing, had copied all our financial documents, secured my own bank account, moved personal items that mattered to me to a storage unit. I'd even drafted the divorce papers with my attorney, though I hadn't filed them yet. I wanted her to come home first, wanted to look her in the eye when I ended this charade. She walked through the door Sunday evening, looking radiant, glowing. Her hair was different, styled in that effortless way that takes hours to achieve. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen, something expensive and sophisticated. She looked like a woman who'd spent the weekend being worshipped by someone who thought she hung the moon. "How was Chicago?" I asked from the living room, where I'd been waiting. "Good, productive. The client loved the campaign." She was unpacking her bag, efficient and practiced. "How was your weekend?" "Enlightening," I said. Something in my tone made her look up. For the first time in months, she really looked at me. Saw me sitting there in our living room with a manila folder in my lap and an expression she couldn't read. "What's that?" she asked, nodding at the folder. "The end of our marriage." I said it quietly, matter-of-factly, like I was commenting on the weather or what was for dinner. Her face went white. "What are you talking about?" I opened the folder and pulled out the photos, spread them on the coffee table like I was dealing cards. Her face in every one, laughing and kissing and looking happier than she'd looked with me in years. She sank into the chair across from me, staring at the images like they were written in a foreign language. "How long have you known?" she asked, finally. "Officially, a month. Unofficially, since that dinner with Mike and Jennifer when you looked like you'd seen a ghost." She was crying now, but quietly. Not the dramatic sobs of someone caught red-handed, but the quiet tears of someone whose secret had finally been exposed. "I never meant for this to happen," she said. "But it did happen. For 4 months it happened. Every day, every night, every time you looked me in the eye and lied. I love you," she said, and I almost laughed. "No, you don't. You love him. You've been in love with him for months. I've seen it in your face, in the way you move, in the way you light up when your phone buzzes. You love him, and that's okay. What's not okay is pretending you still love me." She was shaking her head, reaching for me across the space between us. "It's not that simple. Yes, I have feelings for David, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. You're my husband. We have a life together." We had a life together, past tense. You destroyed it the first time you kissed him. You destroyed it every time you chose him over me. Every time you lied to my face. Every time you came home to me smelling like his cologne and pretending everything was normal. We can fix this, she said desperately. I'll end it with him. We can go to counseling. We can rebuild. I stood up, gathered the photos. I don't want to rebuild. I don't want to be your second choice. I don't want to be the man you settle for because you got caught. You're not my second choice. Then why did you choose him? Every day for 4 months, you chose him, your passion, your excitement, your authentic self. You gave me your leftovers. She had no answer for that because we both knew it was true. I'm filing for divorce, I said. I've already moved my important things out. I'll be staying at Mike's until we sort out the house. Just like that? 8 years of marriage and you're just walking away? I'm not walking away, Sarah. You walked away months ago. I'm just making it official. I headed toward the door, then turned back one last time. For what it's worth, I hope he makes you happy, genuinely happy. But you should know that I will never forgive you for turning our marriage into a lie. I will never forgive you for making me complicit in my own humiliation. I left her crying in our living room, surrounded by photos of her betrayal and the ruins of what we'd built together. She fought it at first, tried to claim the affair was a mistake, that the photos were misleading, that she deserved half of everything regardless. But her attorney advised her to settle. Adultery cases are ugly, public, career-destroying. Better to take the smaller settlement and disappear quietly.
David left his wife 3 months later. They moved in together into a downtown condo, started posting pictures on social media like they were teenagers in love. She looked happy in those photos, happier than she'd looked in years. Part of me was glad for her. Part of me hoped she'd found what she was looking for. But another part of me, the part that had loved her completely and been destroyed by her deception, hoped she'd learn that relationships built on betrayal have shaky foundations. Hoped that someday David would find his own hotel receipts, his own private investigator, his own photos of her with someone new. I kept the house, but sold it 6 months later. Too many memories in every room, too many ghosts in every corner. I bought a smaller place across town, started over completely. New furniture, new routines, new life. People ask me if I'm bitter, if I hate her. The honest answer is complicated. I don't hate her. Hate requires too much energy, too much ongoing connection. But I don't forgive her either. I've simply let her go, released her from my life as completely as she released me from hers that first night she kissed another man. What I've learned is that betrayal changes you permanently. Not necessarily for the worse, but permanently. You become someone who checks credit card statements, who notices when stories don't add up, who trusts carefully, and loves with one foot always pointed toward the exit. It's not paranoia if it's based on experience. I've dated since then. Good women, kind women, women who would never dream of living double lives or treating love like a disposable commodity. But I find myself holding back, keeping pieces of myself in reserve. The part of me that loved Sarah without question, without doubt, without self-protection, that part is gone forever. She took it with her to that hotel room, and it died there along with our marriage. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe loving someone completely, trustingly, blindly is a young man's game. Maybe wisdom is learning to love fully while still protecting yourself, still maintaining your own identity, still remembering that even the deepest love can be a temporary thing. I'm happy now, or something like it. I have work I care about, friends who matter, hobbies that fulfill me. I have a life that's entirely my own, unmarked by compromise or deception. Some nights, lying in my bed in my house with my books and my routines and my solitude, I feel more authentic than I did in years of marriage. But I also know what I've lost. The particular intimacy of building a life with someone, of being known completely by another person, of having someone to share the small daily joys and sorrows that make up a human existence. I know the weight of silence, of coming home to an empty house, of having wonderful news or terrible news and no one whose opinion matters most. Sarah taught me that love is not enough, that commitment is not enough, that even the deepest intimacy can be betrayed, that even the most sacred promises can be broken, that even the person who knows you best can choose to destroy you. But she also taught me that I can survive heartbreak, that I can rebuild a life from ashes, that I am stronger than I knew, more resilient than I imagined, more capable of starting over than I ever believed possible. If I saw her today, I don't know what I'd say. Maybe nothing. Maybe the silence would say everything that needed saying. Maybe we'd both just remember what we'd had and what we'd lost and how completely we'd failed each other. Or maybe I'd thank her. Thank her for teaching me that I could love someone completely and survive losing them. Thank her for showing me that I was capable of building a life alone, of finding happiness that didn't depend on anyone else's choices, promises, or faithfulness. Thank her for breaking my heart so thoroughly that when I put it back together, I made it stronger. The receipt from the Fairmont Hotel is still in my wallet, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a reminder of truth, as proof that reality is always more complicated than the stories we tell ourselves, that the people we love are capable of surprises, both wonderful and terrible, that trust is a choice we make every day, and that sometimes, despite our best efforts, we make it with the wrong person.
But we make it anyway. We love anyway. We build lives anyway. We tell ourselves stories about forever anyway, because the alternative, never trusting, never loving, never risking the devastating possibility of betrayal, isn't really living at all. Sarah chose her story, David chose his, and I chose mine. In the end, that's all any of us can do. Choose our story, live it as honestly as we can, and hope that when the final page is written, we can look back and say we were brave enough to love, strong enough to survive heartbreak, and wise enough to learn the difference between the two. The weight of silence isn't always heavy. Sometimes it's just the space where new stories begin.